Okay, so we are thinking about this week's portion, which is the portion of Vayishlach, and he sent, and it refers to the preparation, Jacob's preparation to go and reunite and meet his brother Esau after Jacob has been away for 20 years, right? Because we read about how Jacob stole his brother's blessings, and then he was afraid, his mother was afraid that Esau would kill Jacob. So she tells him to run away to her brother and also to marry a wife. So you have two benefits. You get a good bang for your buck. You have two benefits. You get to save your life and you find a wife. And for 20 years he was there, and we discussed how he 14 years he worked for this first for Rachel, but he was strict and he got Leah. So he ends up marrying first Leah and then Rachel, and then he has 11 sons, one daughter. And another 6 years he works to amass in payment for sheep, and God blesses him, and he has a tremendous amount of possessions because he sells the sheep, and he gets other possessions. And now he's coming back to Israel. And in this week's parsha is he sends messengers to figure out what is the state of mind of his brother. And a lot of this parsha is about the preparation for this great meeting, and the meeting, which, as we will see, has tremendous amount of significance for that family, for history, for the mystical perspective. So everybody has what to say about the story. So here we go. We'll read the nutshell, as is our custom, and we'll see from there. So Jacob returns to the Holy Land after 20 years stay in Haran, and sends angel emissaries to Esau in hope of a reconciliation. But his messengers report that his brother is on the warpath with 400 armed men. Jacob prepares for war. He prays and sends Esau a large gift consisting of hundreds of heads of livestock to appease him. That night, Jacob ferries his family and possessions across the Yabok River. He, however, remains behind and encounters the angel that embodies the spirit of Esau. So that verse says he met a man. And because of what unfolds, the rabbis say that refers to a man who embodied Esau's spiritual guardian angel. Okay. Now what happens then? With whom he wrestles until daybreak. Jacob suffers a dislocated hip. In other words, the angel harms him in the hip. But vanquishes the supernal creature, who bestows on him his name Israel, which means he who prevails over the divine. Yisar El, he's the Sar, he's the minister over El, over the divine, over God, meaning over the angel. And finally, we have this probably one of the most moving scenes in the Bible. Jacob and Esau meet, embrace, and kiss, but part ways. Okay. Jacob purchases a plot of land near Shechem, whose crown prince, also called Shechem, abducts and rapes Jacob's daughter Dinah. Dinah's brothers Shimon and Levi avenge the dead by killing all male inhabitants of the city, after rendering them vulnerable by convincing them to circumcise themselves. Again, if we had not had enough occurrences so far in the book of Genesis of tricking, so Jacob tricks his father and steals the blessings from his brother. Next week, Jacob will be tricked when they sell Joseph. But this week, Jacob's sons trick the people of the town to circumcise themselves, and then they kill everybody. And whether or not that was a good move or a bad move, or morally just or morally unjust, is up for debate. And the first people to debate it was Jacob and his children themselves, because Jacob was not happy with this. And maybe we'll get into that if we have time, or if anyone is interested. Jacob journeys on. Rachel dies while giving birth to her second son, Benjamin, and is buried in a roadside grave near Bethlehem. So this is very tragic. She dies in childbirth. She's Jacob's most beloved wife, but she dies very young, and she's not even buried at the family plot, which is in Hebron, which is not that far. If you drive by car, it's 40 minutes away. Bethlehem to Hebron, but he buries her on the road. That's another story. Reuben loses his birthright because he interferes with his father's married life. Jacob, what does that mean? According to the Medrash, the verse says that Jacob slept with Bilhah, his father's maidservant. In other words, one of his father's maidservant. The commentaries soften the sin, and they say it means that after Rachel died, Jacob's primary residence was with Rachel. After Rachel died, Jacob set up his bed, his primary residence, in the tent of Bilhah, who was Rachel's maidservant. And Reuben was offended for his mother Leah, Rachel's sister, and he said, okay, my mother will be second to her sister, but not second to her sister's maidservant. So that's the rabbinic interpretation of that story. In any case, Jacob arrives in Hebron to his father Isaac, who later dies at age 180. Rebekah has passed away before Jacob arrived. Our parsha concludes with a detailed account of Esav's wives, children, and grandchildren, the family histories of the people of Seir, among whom Esav settled, and a list of the 8 kings who ruled Edom, the land of Esav, and Seir's descendants. In other words, we are finishing up with Esav. So right now, in the end of this parsha, we get a history, the many generations forward of Esav, but it's all recounted in this parsha in brief. And once we finish up with Esav in this parsha, we're done with him. We don't go back to this story. We don't go back to Esav until the 5th book of the Torah, and now we go to the story of Jacob. Later, the Esav actually reappears when the Jewish people are leaving Egypt, and they want to come back to Israel. They want to cut through the land of Edom to get a shortcut and go to the land of Israel. And they send to Esav and they evoke their brotherhood, and they're hoping that Esav would understand. But Esav does not allow Esav did not allow the Jewish people to pass through his land, and that causes them to take a detour. So we're not completely done with Esav yet. The Jewish history is not done with Esav, but the rest of the narrative of the Bible, all the way until the end of it's the end of the 4th book, is we're done with Esav. We finish up with Esav now, and next parsha we specifically go into the specifics of the details of the descendants of Jacob after we finish with Esav. So that's by way of introduction. We'll get into some of the specifics here momentarily, but as always, if anybody has any comments or questions or anything else you want to talk about, please share. Otherwise, we'll do what we usually do, which is start at the beginning. Okay, so there's a lot of unknown. Jacob has no idea what the frame of mind of Esav is. He has no idea. He knows he stole the blessing. He knows 20 years earlier his brother wanted to kill him. He's been away for 20 years, and now he's coming back to Israel, and he's preparing for the confrontation or for the meeting. So first he sends messengers just to get a little bit of a feel what's going on, and he sends a message with the messengers to his brother. They come back and they say, "Look, your brother is confrontational. In other words, your brother's ready for war." And then Jacob is frightened, and we'll see what happens when he's frightened. But before that, what's the initial message that he sends? What is he trying to signal to his brother to sort of pacify him and tell him, "Don't worry that I took your blessings." Like you say in Yiddish, it's not gefährlich, it's not terrible. Verses say, and then we'll see what. So the verses read as follows. Genesis chapter 32, verse 4 is the opening statement of our parsha. Jacob him to his brother up to the land of the field of Edom. So we know at that point, and Jacob commanded them, saying, "So shall you say to my master, to Esav, thus said your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban, and I have tarried until now." So that's introduction. Okay, so I was with Laban until now. "And I have acquired oxen and donkeys, flocks, manservants and maidservants, and I have sent to tell this to my master to find favor in your eyes." Now, what does that even mean? What is he telling him in verse 6? I have acquired oxen and donkeys, flocks, manservants, and maidservants. What is he saying? I made a lot of money. I'm very wealthy. How is that in any sense, in any way, going to pacify Jacob? Telling him, oh, I'm flaunting his blessings. How is that going to help? Now, later, you'll see in verse 7, the angels come back, meaning they say angels, so it's really messengers. In Hebrew, it's the same word, malachim, angels, messengers, same word. An angel is a messenger. Rashi says that the messengers are malachim, are angels. But that's actually strange. It's actually unusual for Rashi to say that, not to take a simple meaning. But in any case, the angels come back, and they say, we came to your brother, to Esav, and he is also coming toward you, and 400 men are with him. Now Jacob is very afraid, and one of the things he does, you'll see later, is he sends gifts of cattle, of animals to his brother. So now we understand he had a lot of cattle because he mentions that in verse 6. But in verse 6, before he sends the gift, why is he mentioning that I had shor v'chamor? I had oxen and donkeys, flocks, manservants and maidservants. Why is he flaunting his wealth? Why is he flaunting his blessings? If he's trying to tell his brother that not to be jealous of me. Don't be jealous that I stole your blessings. By the way, if you look at verse 5, Rashi says that when it says, so shall you say to my master, to Esav, thus said your servant Jacob. He's calling him master. And he's calling himself servant. What is he telling him? He's telling him, don't worry. The blessings that your father blessed me were not fulfilled. Why not? Because father said that your brothers will serve you. And here, I'm serving Esav. So in other words, subtly in chapter 5, Jacob is saying, in verse 5, Jacob is giving Esav a reason not to be jealous. He says, don't be jealous that I got the blessing because look, the blessing did not come into fruition because you're the master, I'm the servant, not the opposite. Okay, so if that's the case, we have to finish examining the rest of verse 5, but also especially verse 6. Why is he then flaunting his blessings? So the commentaries offer a very beautiful interpretation. I would not think of it on my own, I must confess. And they say like this. What they say is, Jacob is saying, I've been successful. However, in what arena was he successful in? He was successful, and his wealth consists of things that were not mentioned in the father's blessings. If you go back to the father's blessings were as follows. May God give you from the dew of the heaven and from the fat of the earth, much grain, and tirosh is wine, and many nations that serve you, etc. But all the wealth is agriculture based. Dew from the heaven, the fat of the earth is to be that the earth should be fertile, and grain and oil. Now, what does Jacob have? Jacob did not invest in real estate. He did not invest in agriculture. Instead, he says, I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, manservants, maidservants. I got everything except for what our father blessed us. So what is he doing? He's telling us, don't be afraid. Don't be upset that you didn't get the blessings. The blessings did not really work. That's one interpretation which I said in the past. I said it in the past multiple times. But I have to add something new because otherwise you're going to say that you already know this. So we're going to add another detail here. We mentioned yesterday that the word, I had oxen and donkeys. I had oxen and donkeys is written, in English it's written in the plural. Vayili shor v'chamor. I had oxen and donkeys. But in the Hebrew it's written in the singular. I had an ox, I amassed, I have acquired an ox and a donkey. It doesn't say it doesn't say it in the plural, it says it in the singular. So what Rashi addresses this issue. Okay, Rashi also addressed what I said earlier, so let's read it inside. It says Rashi, I have acquired oxen and donkeys. My father said to me, of the dew of the heavens and of the fatness of the earth. But this is neither from the heavens nor from the earth. That's from the Medrash Tanchuma. Okay, oxen and donkeys. Hebrew shor v'chamor, literally an ox and a donkey. It is customary to call many oxen ox. A person says to his companion at night, the rooster has crowed, but does not say the roosters have crowed. also the Medrash. In other words, what Rashi is saying is that this is not a big question of why it says it in the singular, because in biblical Hebrew, people will refer to the species in the singular. So if you say, I have a lot of oxen, you could say, I have an ox, because you're not talking about individual ox, you're talking about the species. That's what Rashi says. Okay. But I saw another commentary this morning. It was early, so I forgot who it was. And he says like this. When he says, I had an ox and a donkey, he's using the singular to downplay it. He doesn't want to say, I have many. He's saying, I have only a little bit. Now, you got to follow this. Because the reality is, he didn't have a little bit, he had a lot. So why is he trying to signify that he only has a little? It's not true. Soon he's going to meet Esav, and Esav is going to see the massive amounts of cattle he has. And Esav, in fact, asks, where did you get all of this from? Whose is this? So what happens is like this. From Jacob's perspective, and this is what Jacob is trying to convey to Esav, according to the commentators, what is a blessing? Blessing means, does it mean that you sit in your house and you don't have to work and God sends you the manna from heaven? No, that's not a blessing. Blessing is that you put in effort and God multiplies your effort. So if my effort would have naturally gave me a certain amount of produce or a certain amount of wealth, the fact that that same effort grew exponentially, and now I have a much more blessing than my effort would have justified, that is the definition of blessing. Jacob is not telling Esav that he did not have a lot of blessing. What Jacob is telling Esav, I worked very hard for the blessing. So what I have is commensurate with the effort I put in. So there was no blessing. So that's basically what he's telling him from both angles, both in verse 5 and in verse 6. He's basically telling him the blessing that you're maybe upset. He's not saying it, he doesn't want to mention the blessing, but subtly he's saying the blessing that you're upset that I have received, I have not received it yet. So there's no reason to be upset. Now, so that's what he's saying. Now we understand why he would say that to his brother, because he doesn't want his brother to kill him. So we would understand that he's trying to downplay the blessing because he's afraid. He may even say things that he's not, that are dishonest to a degree because he's trying to save himself. He's afraid. But what is he telling him? Is he implying to his brother that our father's blessing doesn't work? Father blessed me of the dew of the heavens, fat of the earth, and much grain, and it did not come to fruition. So is he saying father's blessings don't work? Is that really what he's telling his brother? So the commentaries say as follows: what he's signaling to his brother is perhaps the reason why I did not get the blessing is because the blessing, you're going to get the blessing. The blessing was intended to you. Why? Because when our father blessed me, yes, I happened to be the one standing there at his feet or sitting there at his feet. But father thought that he's blessing Esav. So maybe the blessing goes to Esav. So when he says the blessing has not been fulfilled, what he's telling him is, don't get upset that I took your blessing. I can't take your blessing. If it's for you, you would get it. And the proof is that none of this came to fruition. So that is one way of reading it. Now, did Jacob himself believe that? I doubt it. I think Jacob believed the time of the blessing has not yet had not yet been fulfilled, right? We're talking about the blessing is not for him personally. It's for the entire span of history. It could be for the future generations. So if it did not happen to Jacob himself, at least not at this point, it will happen later in his life or to his descendants. So that is one way of looking at what Jacob is signaling to his brother. I want to say one more point, which I like a lot. I also said it in the past, and then we move on to some more of the drama. Another thing Esav says, Jacob says, which according to the commentators is an important point, because what he's doing is he's telling his brother, trust me, you don't want these blessings. Don't be upset that I took them. You don't want them. And this is something that Esav already knew. He is just showing it to him. So what he's just focusing his attention to that. And that is, he says the word garti. I have sojourned with Lavan. Im Lavan garti. Now the word garti in modern Hebrew, lagur, means to live. So the modern Hebrew does not pick up the subtlety of what garti really means. Garti comes from the word ger, foreigner, And to be a ger means to be a foreigner, means that this is not your native space. In other words, when Abraham is told by God in the covenant between the parts that your descendants will be foreigners in a foreign land for 400 years, the word there that is used is ger. You should know that your children will be a ger, will be foreigners, sojourners. So what is Jacob telling? When Jacob tells his brother, I have been a sojourner, he's saying that word. Now in that family, that word is a trigger word. You say ger, it reminds everybody of the covenant between the parts. What does the covenant between the parts say? The covenant between the parts is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it says that God will promise this family the land of Israel. But on the other hand, it also says that the people who are going to get Israel are first going to be in exile for 400 years, or foreigners for 400 years. So it's a mixed bag. It's a blessing, but there's also a price to pay for the blessing. Now, Jacob is very smart. Jacob mentions this because what Jacob is trying to do is trying to remind his brother why his brother picked up and left Israel. When it says earlier in the last parsha that Esau left Israel, packed his bags, took his wives and children, and moved to the land of Edom. Why did he move to Edom? He loved his father. Why didn't he stay with his father? Because he said, I don't want to have anything to do with the land of Israel, because to get the land of Israel, you have to pay the price for the land of Israel, which is the Geirut, which is being the foreigner, which is being sent away to and ultimately enslaved in Egypt. So Esau says in the language of the Medrash, it's like what you tell the bee, that I don't need your honey and I don't need your sting. In other words, this blessing is a blessing, but it also comes along with pain. It also comes along with pain for whatever reason. We're not getting into why that is, why we have to go to exile before we get the land of Israel. That's another discussion. But the reality is that the blessing for the land of Israel will come together with the price to pay. And Esau doesn't want to pay that price. So the commentators say that when Jacob tells his brother, I am a ger, what he's telling him is, I'm already paying the price that I cannot live in Israel because I got our father's blessings, which include the land of Israel, but the price has been heavy. You don't want it. And that is what he tries to do, to remind him that I took the blessings, but you may not be so upset that I did. So that's what he's trying to do in these verses, according to some of the commentators. Then we continue, and they come to him and they say, the angels return to Jacob saying, we came to your brother to Esau, and he is also coming toward you, and 400 men are with him. Jacob is very afraid. Jacob became very frightened and was distressed. So he divided the people who were with him and the flocks and the cattle and the camels into two camps. And he said, if Esau comes to one camp and strikes it down, the remaining camp will escape. He's ready for battle. And the best thing you do with battle is you separate the camps, and at least if one is hit, the other one will survive. Okay, and then he prays to God in verse 10 and 11, beautiful verses, 10, 11, 12, beautiful verses. Verse 11 is very beautiful, and 13, wow, a long prayer. 10, 11, 12, 13, and then in 14, the next page, he starts to send him gifts. So he lodged there on that night, and he took from what came to his hand a gift for his brother to Esau. 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, etc. 30 nursing camels with their young. Sends him many gifts, and he sends a message with each group of gifts, and he stays there that night, and then that night is when he has this mysterious meeting with the angel, which hopefully we will get to. Okay, so what do we want to talk about? We want to talk about is, first of all, what's the purpose of all of this? So there's a mystical interpretation, but before we get to the mystical interpretation, we read what everybody quotes the Ramban, Nachmanides. Nachmanides tells you that this story, but remember, Nachmanides is the one we mentioned it many times already, that he says that everything the Torah tells us about the patriarchs is because it's a siman, it's a sign. What the stories of the patriarchs are a sign, they're a lesson for the descendants, for us. And Jacob says, and the Nachmanides says that this story is a story for the Jewish people throughout all of history. And that is how do you respond when you are facing a danger? And the answer is that you diversify. In other words, you have multiple avenues of response. You don't just rely on the physical responses, which is to prepare for war and to send gifts to appease, but he also prays. But you don't only pray, you also have to try the natural, you have to do what you can in the natural world. And the natural world also, you don't just pick one avenue, just war or just appeasement. You appease, but you prepare for war. And Ramban, Nachmanides feels that this is a lesson, not just for Jacob himself, but for Jews in all times. We don't rely solely on prayer, but we also don't rely on our physical might. We also pray. And we need God's help. And we're prepared for war, but we also reach out for peace. And that's the proper response. So what is the response when we face danger? The answer is there is no one response. We have multiple responses. That's the way it was with in Jacob's days, but that's also the way it is. That's true for every time in every generation, according to Nachmanides. So that's point number one. Then we get a little bit to the controversy, and the controversy will bring us in to the Kabbalah. So the controversy is that was it right and okay and just that Jacob, who is in our reading is the moral one and the holy one and the one that has the promise of the blessing of Abraham, so the bearer of the legacy of the family, was it correct and was it proper for him to keep referring to Esav as my master, showing that Esav is somehow more powerful than him, and he has to and Jacob has to subjugate himself to Esav? And it happens multiple times in the story. In the beginning, we mentioned that verse, the first verse, second verse of the parsha, where he says, so shall you say to my what I have to say by heart. He says, so shall you say to my master, to Esav, thus said your servant Jacob. And then in the next page, when he sends the gifts, he keeps saying, referring to himself as my servant. And he commanded the first one, saying, in other words, he sent many groups of gifts, which is actually a very interesting point, because the commentaries say that one big gift would not be as appeasing to Esav as many groups of gifts. Psychologically speaking, many groups of gifts are better than one large one. That's what the sages say. But in any case, so he tells each person leading the group of cattle, he says like this, and he commanded the first one, saying, when my brother Esav meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong? And where are you going? And for whom are these before you? You shall say, I belong to your servant Jacob. It is a gift sent to my master, to Esav and behold, he himself is behind us. In other words, every group says that Jacob says, this is for my servant. This belongs to your servant Jacob. It's a gift to my master. Keeps referring to himself as servants. And then finally, we'll skip the meeting with the angel, but you get to the end of the story and they actually meet up. What happens when they actually meet up? He bows to his brother 7 times. First of all, everybody bows. And he went ahead of them and prostrated himself to the ground 7 times until he came close to his brother. So is this the proper response, or was this just degrading himself before his brother, who was, at least according to the reading of the sages, less than righteous? Is this the way he should have behaved? And there is debate in the Medrash. In some places says that because Jacob lowered himself and subjugated himself before his brother, that was considered negative. And that's why throughout history, Jacob's descendants suffered because Esav had power over us. Remember, Esav, the sages believe that Esav was that the Roman Empire descended from Esav. People from Edom went to Rome and helped establish Rome, according to this interpretation of the sages. So in any case, Rome was so powerful over Jerusalem specifically because Jacob himself gave them the power to do so by referring to himself as servant and as bowing. And therefore, from the Medrash, it seems that this was something, at least according to some opinions, this was something negative. The other interpretation of the Medrash says, no, the opposite is true. That's what you have to do. If you have a mighty person threatening you, appease them. Don't be afraid to appease them. So there's 2 ways of how to review the story. Now I want to get a little bit into the Kabbalah, because this Kabbalistic insight is which we mentioned in the past, but you can't read this parsha without going back to the basics of how the Kabbalah reads the story. So we have to go back up to it and do a little bit repeating and hopefully some adding. But in any case, you have to have the Kabbalistic view to understand the Kabbalistic view of this whole story. You have to think about this concept of Jacob bowing to Esav and referring to himself as servant time and again, because spiritually speaking, Kabbalistically speaking, Esav is indeed the master. Jacob is indeed the servant. And in short, Esav has a much greater potential than Jacob. And therefore Jacob is trying to connect to Esav to sort of, so to speak, receive some of Esav's energy and potential. And now we have to unpack that statement and explain what's going on here. And that sheds light into many things that happen in the first half of the parsha. So we're just getting started. So you can look at this from many angles. I'm going to start. In other words, we could look at this concept. We could start from different starting points. I'm going to start from the basics, go back all the way to the beginning. These are concepts that you probably heard before, but it's always good to repeat briefly. I'll try to stay brief about the main points. So the main points is that according to the Kabbalah, there is what we call the world of chaos and the world of order. And to be brief, the world of chaos precedes the world of order, and the world of chaos is actually much more powerful than the world of order. What are the Kabbalists saying? They're saying as follows, that when God wants to create the world, God has to express certain energy, an energy or groups of energy, different types of energy in order to create. He has to express certain energies. And now we know that there are 10 sephirot, 10 divine powers. And we actually have all 10 in our soul, because our soul is created in the image of God. So just like God has 10 energies to create the world, our soul also possesses a reflection of these 10 soul powers, called the 10 sefirot, which is the basics of the Kabbalah. Says the Kabbalah, before God creates the sefirot as we know them, the 10 energies, what we think of the sefirot is take two, is the beta, or the final version. There was an earlier version, and the earlier version is similar to the later version in that there are 10 sephirot, 10 soul powers, 10 divine powers. But those powers, the light, the energy was very intense. Now, because the light was so intense, there were certain problems. There are at least two big problems, but we're going to focus on one. The problem is that these 10 soul powers cannot work together, and they clash. Why can't they work together? Because to work together, if you have a group of 10 people with 10 different perspectives and you want to put them on one committee to create one entity and to make one project, the problem is that you have 10 people pulling in 10 different directions. And if all of them are very forceful and very powerful about their opinion, about what they feel, then nobody's going to compromise. And no one's going to accommodate the other person's perspective. And what you end up with is a crash of these energies. And therefore, the world of chaos became chaos. It was destroyed. And the sparks fell very low. And everything we know in unholiness really has the sparks of chaos, which means that the potential, the energy is actually very intense. But for whatever reason, it fell down, and now the way it is in this world, these energies are harmful. But make no mistake, their source is very great. After stage one, after the world of chaos which failed, God says, you know what we're going to do? Take two. Take two is going to be order. And what is order? Order is we're going to do the same 10 sefirot, but instead of having intense light, the lights will be diminished. The energy will be diminished. So kindness in the world of chaos is not as powerful as kindness in the world, and the kindness in the world of order is not as powerful as kindness in the world of chaos. And the most important component is that it has humility. So therefore, even kindness understands that sometimes kindness is not good. I have to make room for judgment. And therefore, these 10 energies could interplay and intermingle with each other. They could combine, and then combined, they can create all the energies that are necessary to create the entire world, which every creation in the world, the energy of each creation is some combination of some mix of some shade of these 10 letters, 10 sefirot of the world of order. Okay, Says the Kabbalah, Esav is the embodiment of the world of chaos. Jacob is the embodiment of the world of order. The goal of creation is to make peace, that the world of order should be able to channel the world of chaos in a proper way. And then you have both qualities. You have the quality that you have the energy of chaos, so you can accomplish a lot, and everything you do is intense, but it's also directed in the same place, to the right place. Now, this is going to help us understand a lot of things, but I'm just trying to think. Yeah, let's start before we go to the human soul. Before we get to the human soul, let's stay on this topic for a moment. Now we understand, say the Kabbalists, why Jacob has to bow to Esav and refer to him as my master, because Esav is more powerful than Jacob. And he wants to meet up because he wants to partner. Okay. Another thing that is very interesting that I don't think I said in the past, but I'll say it now. And that is that Jacob divides his camp into two. Right? That's what the verse says. He's prepared for war. So the verse says that Vayachatz, he divided the camp, the people that were with him, to two camps. Right? And then he says the justification is two camps, because if Esav hits one camp, the other camp will be saved. So let's look at the verses, right? So that's what he does. Jacob became very frightened and was distressed, so he divided the people who were with him and the flocks and the cattle and the camels into two camps. Okay. Why two camps? And Jacob said, "Oh God of my I know." And he said, "If Esav comes to one camp and strikes it down, the remaining camp will escape." Okay, fine. Now I ask you, why two camps? Why not three? You go to battle and you're going to divide your camp. Very often you divide the camp into three. Why not? Why two? I'm not a big professor about history, but I'm sure many battles you read about, you'll say that they divide the force into more than two. So the idea that I have to preserve some people is that you have to divide, but why two? So mystically speaking, dividing into two is very significant, because Jacob represents three, as we'll discuss in a moment. Esav represents two. And when Jacob divides his camp into two, what he's trying to do is, mystically speaking, he's trying to align himself with Esav's energy in preparation for meeting up with Esav. Why do I say that Esav is two and Jacob is three? So first of all, Jacob is the third one of the patriarchs, but that's not the point here. The point here is like this. According to the Kabbalah, the 10 Sfirot, if you ever saw the chart of the 10 Sfirot divide into three columns. Let's see if there's a chart on the internet. I mean, there is. Let's see if we can find it easily. Okay, fine. Not a bad pic, not a great picture, but not too terrible. Okay, so let's look at the chart here. So at the picture. So you have a picture here of 10 Sfirot. Here is 11, but that's another story. We're not going to get into it right now. The details are not important. What's important here is that you have three columns. You have the right column, you have the left column, and you have the center column. And this picture is a beautiful picture for the world of order. The world of chaos, however, it does not divide into three columns, it divides into two columns. What do I mean? Why am I saying this? So what we mean is as follows. When you're in the world of chaos, you're basically in the world of extremes. And extremes divide into two. Okay, let's start somewhere else. Let's put in a little bit more of the ingredients, and then we can mix everything together. Within the world of order, within our life, we also have a little bit of chaos and a little bit of order. And the way that plays out is, generally speaking, you could divide it within the person between intelligence, between the mind and the heart. And the heart is chaotic. It's the world of chaos. On one hand, it's intense, and it has tremendous amount of strength and energy. The problem is it's not always order. In other words, it doesn't always lead you in a logical and proper direction. Sometimes the passion of the heart could actually lead you to the break, to self-destruct. Then you have the mind. And what is the mind? The mind is order. It's logical. It's orderly. The problem is that the mind, ultimately, someone who's very intellectual, it diminishes the passion. Because the more intellectual you are, the less emotional you are. Usually it breaks down that way. But the mind itself, the mind is cool. The mind is cool and collected. The heart is passionate. Now, what's the goal? Is the goal to be a passionate person or intellectual person? Problem is that each one has certain limitations. The goal of living a wholesome life is within the person himself. The person has to bridge and make peace between Jacob and Esav, between the world of chaos and the world of order. And we're going to get to that later. I don't know if we have that much time, but later we're going to talk about Jacob remains alone and he battles with the man. Now that's a contradiction. If he's alone, how is he battling with a man? The conventional interpretation is he's alone, he's without his family, and he battles with a man. But the mystics say he's alone and he battles with a man, the Esav, within himself. The battle is within himself. Within himself, there's the battle between the chaos and the order, between the Esav and the Jacob, between the mind and the heart. And the problem with the mind is the mind tells you this is good, but the mind doesn't have the fuel, doesn't have the passion. So just because you know it's good doesn't mean you're going to do it. The heart, on the other hand, if the heart wants something, it's going to go full force. The problem is that sometimes if the heart is not directed, it will take you full force to a negative place. So you have to have that encounter between Jacob and Esav within the person, also collectively within the world. But so this story can be understood in multiple ways, and they're all true. But let's go back to the number 2, verse number 3. So because I want to bring in the heart, because you see the heart is extremes. Heart, emotion, it's usually I'm either attracted to you or either I love you or I hate you. That's the state of mind of the emotion. The heart, the emotion is usually not neutral. If you don't bother me one way or the other, then my heart is not responding to you. But my emotions respond to extreme. Either I love this, I hate this. That's the way the emotion works. That's certainly the way chaos works. In other words, the world of chaos works. In other words, it's intense, so you have to take a stand. You have to take a position. Am I for it or am I against it? There is no synthesis, there's no balance between the two, because there cannot be balance unless there is diminished lights, unless there's some degree of compromise. And therefore, 3, which represents you have both extremes, but then you have a middle pillar which can unite the two and can create balance and can synthesize the two. The middle pillar is a product of the world of order. It does not exist in the world of chaos. So Esav either loves you or hates you. Either he wants to kill his brother, and that's one day, literally the next day, because of Jacob's sending the gifts and speaking to him, etc. Literally the next day when they meet, he's crying and hugging and kissing. You see the extremes, because that's number 2. He's a product or an embodiment of the world of chaos. Jacob is a product of the world of order. And therefore, Jacob is the one who has to direct Esav. And that ties into the fact of why Rebekah wanted Jacob to get the blessings, not because she didn't want Esav to be blessed, but because she felt that Esav's own blessings, if you bless Esav directly, it's going to harm him. You need the world of order to channel the world of chaos. So Jacob wants to communicate with with Esav, his brother, with the world of chaos. To do so, he has to put himself as much as possible in the shoes of Esav, align his camp with the number 2, because that's what Esav represents. Now, Kabbalistically, Jacob is the 3rd of the patriarchs, because Jacob is the middle. Jacob is the one who synthesizes both extremes of his grandfather and his father. His father and grandfather were opposites. His father was a man of kindness, a man of love, and his grandfather Abraham was a man of kindness and love, and Isaac was a man of discipline and awe. And what was Jacob? Jacob was in between. He had the balance. So Jacob is the 3rd because he's a product of the 3rd column. But here, when he wants to greet Esav, he separates into two. Why two? Because he wants to connect to Esav on Esav's own terms. And Esav's terms, there are two. There's no the middle path, which can create balance between the two. But holiness is all about balance. It's all about balance. So it's about taking the force of the chaos, which in this world appears as negative, but channeling that in the proper way. So one example would be that the sages say, we mentioned it yesterday, the sages say you have to love God. The verse says, love God with all your heart. Say the sages, b'shnei yitzarecha, with both your inclinations, with your good inclination and with your bad inclination. So the commentaries say that when you love God with your animal soul, then the love is much more intense. Because the godly soul loves God, but the godly soul is too intellectual. So its love is not passionate. But the animal soul, if you can get the animal soul to love God, then you're loving God with much more passion. And this explains so much about the universe. In some ways, we sense that negativity has much more power than strength in the world, but also within ourselves. Many people, I'm not going to blame everybody here, but I'll speak for myself. If you have a desire for something that is less than holy, sometimes that desire is much more powerful than the desire for holiness. So how do you understand this? So the Kabbalah says, of course, because that's the world of chaos. And in the world of chaos, even though the world of chaos has much more potential, but the way the sparks fell down into this world, the world of chaos now is not organized. So it fell down, that energy fell down into negative spaces. And therefore, the energy is much more intense. Your job is to take that intensity and apply that intensity to holiness. And then you're creating the unity between Yaakov and Esav. Now, Steve, give me just 1 second. According to the sages, this is the drama of the two brothers meeting. The two brothers meeting is not just two brothers hugging and kissing, but it's the reunification of the world of chaos and the world of order, which, when that happens, the world is complete. So that was a temporary moment of perfection of the world. It won't be fully perfect in the Messianic era. We'll talk about that later if we have time. But in other words, this meeting is of cosmic importance. It's not just the two individuals meeting up, but it's the two energies that they represent. And if we could have expanded that moment of meeting then the world would reach peace and serenity. It was still premature, so we're still working at it. But what the end of days, what they will look like is the harmony between chaos and order. Okay, a lot more to say on this because it's a very fundamental concept in the Kabbalah, and it sort of paints everything that's happening in the next couple of pages. But that's a little bit of an introduction. Go ahead, Steve, please.
Good morning, Rabbi. According with respect to biology, heartbeats are extremely rhythmic. However, brain waves are chaotic. So it's kind of like the opposite.
It's the mirror opposite, yes. But if you talk about emotion, right? When a person sounds emotion, they can't sit in one seat. Someone who's emotional right now, I'm feeling love, or I'm feeling fear, or I'm feeling distress. I'm chaotic. I can't sit straight. On the contrary, when a person's thinking about an idea, that's just because I understand something. I understand 2 + 2 is 5. It's not going to make me jump out of my seat. So I'm not referring to the biology so much. I'm talking about the experience, the subjective experience, what the person feels like. When a person feels emotion is moving. He's moving. He's not. You can't be settled and say, "Well, I feel intense love to you, but I'm just going to keep it to my heart." It doesn't work that way. By the way, when a person feels emotion, the heart rate starts to change. Right? If a person feels anxiety in the negative or feels even excitement, you're going to be able to test it with your own. You'll be able to test it without a CAT scan machine, right? Just by putting your hand on the chest or on the pulse. So the point here is that yes, when I say heart to heart when I say heart, I don't mean heart, I mean emotion. When a person is experiencing emotion, it's not static. It keeps moving and it keeps changing, and I can't sit still, and I am chaotic. And hopefully the mind is not supposed to crush emotion. It's not the goal. The goal is that the mind could direct emotion, direct my love and my passion to the right things, direct me away from unhealthy fear and anxiety. but direct me toward things that are true dangers, but even the true dangers to respond in rational ways. So it's not here to destroy the emotion or the emotional reaction, but it's here to direct it. And if you had no emotional reaction whatsoever, you also wouldn't be living. You would just be a computer. In other words, that's not that. So you'd be like the godly soul that loves God. But we say no, you need the animal soul to love God. Why? Because then the love is much more passionate. So that is a little bit of the Kabbalistic idea, but it also applies mystically. We see it in every story. Dividing it into two camps is significant because when you want to connect to somebody, you have to speak their language. And Jacob and Esav is an extremist. He's one where emotion is extreme. I love you. I don't love. I hate you. It's almost never neutral. Neutral just means I'm not responding to you emotionally. So there's no emotion here whatsoever. It's not an emotion. But emotion is usually much more intense than an idea. I evaluate somebody. I could say, okay, neither here nor there, no problem. That's the product of the mind. And even when I have intense emotion, what the mind would do is bring in other emotions. So let's say I have anxiety. I say I have anxiety is a strong word, but I don't like something. I don't like to go. I don't like to go to the dentist. Okay, so the mind is not going to tell you that it's not going to change that heart, that feeling. But what the mind could do is say, okay, but there's certain benefits that you're going to get from doing something that has certain downsides. In other words, there's always pros and cons. And the mind is the one that introduces the pros and cons. The heart is almost never the one that will introduce that. In other words, the emotion, the world of emotion itself cannot see something from both angles. That would be the product of the intellectual mind. That's bringing order to the chaos. So that is a little bit of introduction about what's happening here. It also explains Jacob fighting with the angel when he's alone, because the Kabbalists will say what's happening here is that Jacob is battling with the chaos within himself. And he has to do that before he can meet his brother, because before you deal with the problem in the outside world, you have to deal with it within yourself. And then finally, we get to the point when there's a lot more to say about the angel, because the angel changes the name, and that's a big deal. And that is a big deal. But we'll get to that maybe, we'll see. But I want to get to the actual meeting, because the actual meeting, especially the way we explained it, is dramatic because it has cosmic consequences. So what happens? So they come, they finally meet, and he went ahead of them. So Jacob puts all his family before, and then he went ahead of them and prostrated himself to the ground 7 times until he came close to his brother. Now you get to verse 4. And Esav round toward him and embraced him, and he fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Then the conversation continues. Basically, Esav says, let's be together. Jacob says, no, we're not ready yet. But let's look at this, and he wept. And this I said in the past, so I'm going to say it again. I apologize, but this is pretty basic. So we have 2 interpretations how to address this meeting. For whatever reason, even though the verse says that the verse portrays it in a way that the meeting was emotional and genuine, the problem is that if you look at the Hebrew letters, Vayishlach, so even though the Hebrew in this Torah scroll, there are no vowels and there are no paragraph breaks and there are no sentence breaks even, but in a few places there are dots on top of the word. And this is an example. This word Vayishlach, if you look carefully, there's a dot on top of each letter. And that is written into the Torah scroll where there are no dots and no sentences and no punctuation marks whatsoever. So this goes back. This is handed down when the Torah was given. When Moshe gave us the Torah, it had those dots. When he wrote his first Torah, it had those dots. So this leads the sages to say something unusual is happening here. And basically there's 2 ways to read it. Either it was genuine and that's unusual, or it wasn't genuine, so those dots are here to alert you that it's not real genuine. So let's read the Rashi's inside, and then we'll do a little bit of the mysticism. Here we go. So he embraced him. His compassion was moved when he saw him prostrate himself all those times. That's what the Medrash says. Esav was moved. He saw Jacob bowing to him so many times. He was moved. And even though yesterday he came with 400 men and he wanted to probably harm him, that's why he came with 400 men. That's why he hired the army. But today, all of a sudden, they're embracing. What changed? So the Medrash says what changed is Jacob prostrated himself. He sent those gifts and he honored Esav, and that was enough to make Esav happy. Vayishlach, and he kissed him. Hebrew Vayishlach. There are dots over the word in the Torah scroll. There is controversy concerning this matter in the Baraita of Sifri. Baraita is Sifri is the Medrash. Some interpret the dots to mean that he did not kiss him wholeheartedly. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, it is a well-known tradition that Esav hated Jacob, but his compassion was moved at that time, and he kissed him wholeheartedly. In other words, there was a debate amongst the sages. They see this beautiful scene. So you can read the scene and say, yes, this reunion, this union, this meeting, it was a wholehearted reconciliation. Or you could say it wasn't really wholeheartedly. And there are two opinions, and they all live happily ever after. No, these two opinions are critical to our life and to our understanding of ourselves and the universe. And the mystical, it's almost 11 o'clock, but the mystical interpretation is as follows. This is the Hasidic interpretation. We're trying, as we mentioned, we're trying to bridge and marry the world of chaos and the world of order, the mind and the heart, but you can also explain it as the physical and the spiritual. Esav is an embodiment of the physical. Jacob is an embodiment of the spiritual. And they have to meet. And they're going to embrace and they're going to kiss. And the question is what happens? And the way we're going to study this is both opinions are true. In the beginning, the point, you can't have a wholehearted transformation. It is a union and a connection that is not wholehearted. In other words, I'm going to do the right thing, even though my animal soul has not been transformed. It doesn't really want to do it. So the embrace that my animal soul follows the Torah, it's not wholehearted because it's not fully genuine because I have not yet been transformed. The animal, the world of chaos, has not yet been transformed. But what we're saying is that's step one. And don't be discouraged, keep doing it. Because ultimately, the goal is, and the goal will be reached, that the union between Jacob and Esav, even though it started as not to be wholehearted, but eventually it's going to be wholehearted. And in the world in general, it's going to happen in the Messianic era. Messianic era, when the world reaches perfection, it's because the might of the physical and all the power of the physical world, which is an embodiment of the world of chaos, will understand that it's here to serve a higher purpose, which is the world of order, which is holiness. And that's when the world reaches perfection. But within the person, there also you have this transformation and this quest to meet your Jacob and your Esav, your spiritual side and your physical side, your body and your soul. Now, in the beginning, it's a bumpy road. It's a bumpy road to get your animalistic side to also want to serve God. It's a bumpy road. But in the beginning, you have the meeting, and the meeting is not wholehearted. But then you get to the second interpretation of the sages who insist it was wholehearted. At that moment, it was wholehearted. In other words, you could get to the space that from first you sort of pushing yourself to do the right thing. The love and the unity is not complete. And then you get to the point after you practice that the animal soul already enjoys the connection to spirituality. In other words, the transformation, at least in certain areas, is complete. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short. A lot more to say. We touched upon, I guess, the first half of the parsha, the main themes of the parsha, but there's a lot more going on in the parsha, of course. So we have to save something for next year. Hope everybody has a wonderful day and a wonderful week and a wonderful Shabbat. Thank you.